Hey, I wanted to talk about what happened, not to me personally, but to one of my relatives who was young. And I'm all about learning from what we suffer. And I think it's tragic for people to suffer and never be able to teach anything. Psalm 51 talks about that with David, who became very selfish and life beat him up. And he had something to say about being beat up in Psalm 51. And if we can't ever teach anybody, our suffering is just a tragedy, right? It's a tragedy with no gold at the end of it. So life greatly afflicted me because of my selfishness. And when I cried out, I got a right spirit and a free spirit. But I think it's possible that my grandson would have died recently. And maybe it's a miracle that he didn't after what I heard about what he had to say. So I'm going to turn this tragedy into a warning because I think every tragedy should have a warning. And I know somebody who died not long ago. They say nothing about what happened, why this tragedy happened. I know people a year and a half ago who had a horrific tragedy go on. There's no warning. There's no story. There's no understanding to anything. What a sad thing it is when we can't find any treasure in our afflictions and help other people, because that's what Psalm 51 is all about too. So my grandson actually went to a party, and it was an overnight party, and he came home. The parents at that party provided a lot of alcohol, and then they left the party. My grandson had never drank in his life. And so he had a violent reaction to alcohol. They left hard liquor, beer, they left it all and left the kids. And to me, it's a miracle that these people aren't sitting in jail today because of the death of a minor who was under 18 on their hands. That's the real miracle here. And I hope that and pray that they learn something from this themselves. And I do think it was an absolute miracle that my grandson didn't die, because it sounds to me like he was on the verge of serious toxic shock and maybe death. So I wanted to talk about that a little, because spiritual things to the selfish mind are foolishness. And unless our righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the selfish Pharisees and hypocrites, we won't enter the kingdom because we're selfish also, right? So it's the silent, hidden, secret sins of our soul and heart where people don't let God be in their thoughts. It can be the most insidious and the most dangerous and the most deadly, because people aren't letting God be in their thoughts. It's the secret place. What we do in secret, we get rewarded openly for, that has to do with the spirit of our mind. So Jesus says, what you do in secret, God will reward you openly for. And maybe that's why people that don't deal with their vices, because they're selfish, sin, vice, addiction, it doesn't matter what it's to, is all has to do with one bedroot called selfishness. So when we don't care about loving God or loving each other, we're going to be addicted to something that's destructive. It's part of spiritual law, and spiritual law is alive and well, just as much as governmental law is kind of dying though. But so we can be in physical law, or we can be in spiritual law. And I think when we don't listen and we don't learn and we don't understand what's going on in our inner soul, we get rewarded for it openly. We come under physical law instead. That's what's so powerful about my grandchild. The parents in this story that provided the alcohol were screaming, "Don't talk, don't tell, don't talk, don't tell. Are you going to tell? Are you going to tell? Are you going to tell? Are you going to tell?" To me, it was a miracle that he actually told what happened in such heavy oppression from adults to not talk and don't tell, like little kids, right? So we all get rewarded openly for our foolishness. If we're going to have a dumb spirit and blind, be fools, we're going to bump into walls and people will see it outwardly, right? Shame will be our portion. And some people just do stupid stuff and they get ashamed, and they do stupid stuff, they get ashamed. And they're on that merry-go-round, they don't even get off. Why? Because they don't learn anything from it. So I decided to be a learner years ago, and I've never stopped learning since then. So pride and shame, pride and shame, pride and shame are the reward of fools who hide and lie, right? And, because I didn't throw in the white flag and just give up, I decided that to make what happened to King David have some value to me too. Against you and you alone have I sinned, and what I allowed to go on in my thoughts and what I acted out because of the way I thought. So David lost a child. He murdered a woman's husband. He caused so much pain and suffering it wasn't funny. And then he judged another guy to death for what he had done. And when the prophet said, hey, I'm not talking about somebody else, I'm talking about you, it actually opened his eyes. And he said, give me a right spirit, Lord. Give me a free spirit. Against you and you alone have I turned down my conscience, my God conscience on you, and done what's evil in your sight. And a lot of people have gone down. That king became absolutely treacherous when he had a vexed soul, like everybody will, that is at war in their own conscience. Everybody pays for the person that's at war in their own conscience. So, let's see here. I don't know if I have any more to say than that. I wish I had Psalm 51 to read right in front of me. But if you're going to suffer, there's always something to learn, and God can use you to warn other people. The tragedy about that, when you think about the rich guy that went to hell, and he was warned over and over and over, right? And so he sees the poor guy in Jesus's arms, and he says, God, go warn my family to wake up in their conscience towards God. Wake them up. Go, go, go tell him, please, please. And he's crying from hell because he can see heaven, where there's no water, where he had no value for the bread of life or living water either. And Jesus says, hey, if they don't listen on earth, forget it. They're not going to listen for somebody who's crying from the grave either. They're not even going to hear somebody crying from hell about how bad it is here, because all of our lusts unfulfilled have come upon us, where we can't ever be satisfied for any of them. I think that's what hell is like, really. So the real problem for everything is just selfishness. You want to be tormented by devils? People are, because they're selfish. Every evil thing happens on the altar of self-love and selfishness. Loving yourself isn't anybody's problem. It never has been. Love the Lord with all your heart, strength, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Would you want your child to go to a party and have adults buy them a lot of heavy-duty liquor, leave them on their own, and end up with a dead kid? Yeah, good to think about these things. And all things can work together for good when you decide to not be selfish. You'll be a learner instead. You won't walk around with a dumb spirit, protecting your pride and being a liar. And you saw my video, if you saw it, where I was driving across a mountaintop and was going to drive off the edge. There's a reason: selfishness. And thank God my baby was in the back of my car, because she saved my life that night. And I had to decide whether I was going to take off the cloak of being a prideful liar and tell the truth, so I could warn other people about how deadly the claws and teeth and fangs are of a selfish woman. All for the glory of God the Father. Amen.